Pray for Van's cousins. Okay. All right. Remember Judy Nittmeyer? All right. Brother Steve Hill, we ask if you would to lead us in prayer as we open this morning.
Father, we thank you for your goodness to us, Lord. We thank you for yourself, for your presence, that you bless us with from time to time. Pray that you bless us in this Sunday school hour. We need your presence. We need your touch. Pray that you bless us. You bless us as you bless us. Bless us. Lord, we also bring these needs to you. Thank you, Lord, for your goodness to each one of us. But there are times when we're in need, we suffer the reverses of life. Pray that you would remember this one who suffered a stroke, that you'd help them, you'd be near to them, you'd work through this circumstance and bring good out of it. Pray that you'd also remember the Stroops. Thank you, Lord, that Ben said the good report in advance on Mrs. Stroop. His dad was over visiting yesterday. Pray, Lord, you remember the Stroops, so the cousins that have cancer, you're able to draw near to them and work in this circumstance. You're able to minister to their hearts and draw them to yourself. For all that you do, we give you the praise, and again, we ask your help and your blessing on this Sunday school hour. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, over the last couple of months, we've been working through in our Sunday school lesson series on the biblical family values, and a lot of good stuff that's been packed in there, and each one of the lessons, if we would apply it to our lives, to our families, or even individually, there's a lot of good nuggets of truth there. And we're coming to the end of the series, and we'll start a new one next week. And but the one for today is one cultivating a positive attitude. And how many would say? I'm going to wake you up. How many would say that this glass is half full? If you think this glass is half full, stand up. Well, then you can all move over there because this lesson is not for you. No, I'm just kidding. You can sit down.
I think it's half empty, too.
You think it's half empty? It is, well, we won't get into technicalities of all of that. The glass is kind of shaped, so height-wise it's half full. Volume-wise, not so much. And so for those of you who are analyzing that, now you know. But cultivating a positive attitude. And the key verse comes out of Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. And a lot of positive things to focus on there. And I hope at the end of the lesson that we'll be able to identify several ways maybe that we can have a more positive outlook, or we can demonstrate a more positive attitude in our life. And in keeping with the theme of the biblical family values, the Christian family should be marked by positivity. There should be a positive atmosphere in our homes and in our families. Years ago, I read about a preacher, a pastor, who said, I never preached a sermon to my people until I had practiced it, applied it for 6 months. And that's kind of convicting, especially if you're a pastor, in preaching things that we are already applying in our life. So if that was the case, I should have deferred to some more pious soul to teach this lesson today. So since confession is good for the soul, we confess, I continue to try to be more positive in my attitude in my life. And so there's the positivity in that. But I do think there's a repugnant ditch on both sides of this idea of this road. And nobody likes the negative Nelly. Someone who's always down, everything's bad, doom, gloom, the sky is falling, the catastrophe will end the world is looming on the horizon. At least I do, I try to avoid those people like the plague, because we have enough of stuff to deal with in our life, to be sucked into the vortex of all the negativity and drama that surrounds our life. But that's one ditch, and we can think about that aspect, and I'll pose this question to you, and you can give me your response as we start off this morning. But what are some ways that having a negative attitude, the antithesis of this lesson, it has a bad testimony for Jesus? How does having a negative attitude have a bad testimony?
You're living in constant fear.
Okay? They're fearful of what could hypothetically happen.
Christians are supposed to be happy.
Sure.
If we're always negative, people are going to think if that's what Christianity is, then I don't want anything with it.
Absolutely. If that's your religion, if that's what Jesus does for you, well, I don't know that I want anything to do with that. Any other ideas? Both good, both right, all right.
Was it Martin Luther's wife who asked him one morning, did God die overnight or something like that?
Yeah. Oh my. Nobody think that God died because of the way that we carry ourselves. Yeah, and they're filled with doubt, fear, unpleasant to be around. People are always negative. Think, boy, their life must be so boring. All they do is focus on the bad stuff. Just discouraging, defeated life. On the other hand, we've all been around those people who seem to be living in some ultra-utopia lifestyle and mindset that everything is smiles and they're bouncing off the wall and eternal optimism, upbeat, everything's rose-lined pathways, nothing is wrong, everything's great, nothing's ever better. And they're like, it makes you want to go up and pinch them. Are you living in the same world I'm living in? Are you in the same realm of reality that we are all walking in? And somewhere in the middle, I believe there's a healthy balance. And the reality is that as Christians, we should, if anybody should, we should be positive, have a positive attitude because of what Christ has done for us. And the hope of eternity that awaits the child of God. And we, if anybody, should be able to share the encouraging message and have a positive outlook on life. And so as we work through this lesson on cultivating a positive attitude, how we can apply maybe some things, or at least be encouraged. Even though it's maybe gloomy outside, we can have a positive outlook in our soul. So the first part of the lesson talks about the expression of positivity. And some people say, well, I'm happy. Sometimes you want to say, well, tell your face so it shows. But Paul here writes starts in verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice, let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. And if you read through your booklet, your lesson booklet, it brings out, and it's noteworthy to highlight, that Paul uses this word rejoice 7 times in this letter. And it's a theme that's woven throughout this letter. While Paul is facing some dismal situations, a dismal outlook, being in prison. And if you're here today, you're not in prison, so you have something more than Paul had at this time to be positive for. Yet Paul points out the source and really the only real place that we can find that deep-seated joy and reason to be positive in our life. So rejoice in the Lord, not in our circumstances, not in the litany of things that maybe we were thankful for when we sat down at the Thanksgiving table just a few days ago. But it is only the Lord, it is only God, that we can find the source of all happiness and all rejoicing, the joy that is supposed to be full in our life. And if this old world has taught us anything, it should be the fact that chasing after the elusive happiness of this old sinful world does not bring lasting joy or happiness or positivity to our life. The reality is that the lighthearted frivolity of last night dissipates in the reality what many woke up with this morning. And if you're here this morning and you're searching for some sort of lasting, fulfilling, consistent inner joy, if you're searching for that, anything outside of Jesus Christ, you are going to be disappointed. It's going to be elusive because we're not searching in the right places. Paul was so sure of it that he repeated it again. And if it's repeated, pay attention. Listen up. In verse 5, we have this word moderation. It's translated other places as gentle or patient. And someone said that moderation means meekness under provocation, readiness to forgive injuries, equity in management of business, candor in judging of character and the actions of others, sweetness of disposition, and the entire government of the passions. Oof. But may God help us to live out that kind of lifestyle. What Paul says, our moderation, or just our lifestyle, the way we have the general tenor of our life that it would embody that. And we live it out before everyone. The life of gentleness and meekness, a life of restraint and mercy, not demanding our own way, but having an overriding sweetness and gentleness in our life. I believe if we embody that in our life, I believe it goes a long way to contributing to the positive aura that would come off of our life, the positive attitude that we have in our life. And Paul points us out as a means by which others see it. This joy, this positive attitude that we have in our life. And I'm sure we've all experienced the opposite side when things are not going well. Things are rough, and life is pressing in on us, and stress is high, and we're tired, and we're worn out, and maybe frustrated at circumstances, and I'm sure we've all been in that place where the fertile soil has been prepared for the devil to plant this seed of negativity in our life. And if we're not careful, and if we allow him to do it, it quickly spreads throughout our life, and the reality is that others quickly see it. We might mask it for a while. But others will see that in our lives. So Paul says, let your moderation, let that spirit be seen among all people. And for the Lord is at hand, or the Lord is near. Seems to be different ideas here of the meaning of this. Some give different suggestions. Whether it's simply that the Lord's presence is near us, which he always is, or that the Lord is the final judge, which he is the one that will punish. We're not to take matters into our own hands, but we keep a sweet spirit like Paul did, like Paul was just talking about. Or Paul gives another reminder here, possibly, that the Lord's coming is imminent. We live in the reality that the Lord may come back right now. The Lord may come back in a moment of time, and we don't know when that is going to be. And we believe that wholeheartedly. We live in the light of the fact that the Lord may come back right now. May we not be found with an unchrist spirit when he returns. Whichever it is, Paul reinforces this necessity of his previous thoughts. Have joy. Let it be known. Let it be a testimony of our life, of what God has done on the inside. Verse 6, he goes on and says, be careful or be anxious for nothing. As I thought about this, some people seem to be so subdued. You wonder if if anything riles them up. My grandfather Habecker was that way. I don't know if I ever heard him raise his voice, even when there was 13, 14, 15 grandkids bouncing off the walls in their house, even when we had to be put in line. I don't know that I ever heard my grandfather raise his voice. It reminded me of a story that somebody told me a while back that was relating the life of somebody else. And it said that person had set his instrument behind a car, and unknowingly the driver got in his car and backed up and backed right over his instrument. And the person who, the owner of the instrument, very calmly said, "You just ran over my instrument." Now I have to admit, if you don't already know, I'm spun a little tighter than that. Things get a little animated. Things work on me personally. Stress goes up, the anxiety goes up. We worry about things. We get to a place where our nerves almost have had it. The mind works 24/7, and it seems. And days you wonder whether you're coming or going and to or from us. And yet, the literal application of this verse would mean that we are never anxious about anything. Is that a command that's reasonable in its literal sense? Reality tells us that we cannot stick our heads in the sand and have a "I don't care" philosophy. So how do we deal with the anxiety of life? It comes in stages, in different places, and in different ways. So how do we deal with anxiety and the care of life? Because Paul's saying here, it shouldn't steal your joy away. It shouldn't take away from your positive attitude. I feel that is inadequate to tell you the answer to that question as I did give marriage counseling as a single man. Working at Penn View in the position that I'm in has brought the necessity of mastering a balance in all things of life. You know, people ask what I do. My response has become, I try and keep about 8 plates spinning at once. And that's not counting family and church and conference and personal responsibilities. You get the picture. But Paul here gives some elements of a recipe for a balanced life in this passage. Keeping the joy of the Lord alive in our life. Rejoice in the Lord. Keep that joy at full strength in our life. When the joy in our life goes out, things will start to fall apart. Keeping a sweet disposition, the moderation we talked about. Keeping that sweet disposition in the midst of things when the rest of the world is losing their head and going crazy. We maintain the sweet disposition in our life. Paul kind of makes a transition here, and I believe another way we can keep the recipe for a balanced life is keeping the prayer line open. Verse 6, he goes on and says, "But in everything." And he says, be careful, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Part of the song came to my mind as I was thinking about this. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. And personal reality in my life is when stress seems to be overwhelming, there's a greater necessity there to go to God in prayer. And in the realm of prayer, those anxieties, those anxious moments, those things that seem to crush in on us are given to God in prayer. And the supplication that Paul talks about, or the earnest prayer, is made recognizing that when we've reached the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving is only begun. And how many times when life gets crazy, maybe we're anxious about the cares of life, we focus on all of the issues. We become issue-oriented, and we think about all of the things that are going wrong or are we having to deal with, or the circumstances that we wish we were different, and we focus on those issues instead of focusing on the aspect that we take that need to God, to a person, to a being who has infinite resources that are waiting to be unleashed through intercessory prayer. And the child of God just has to tap into those resources. And in those times, we're usually very need-focused. God, I need this, I need that, I need you to do this, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. But don't forget the giving of thanks. Paul reminds us. Some of the more familiar acrostics for prayer outlines specifically list thanksgiving or giving of praise as part of that prayer pattern. And instead of just unburdening all the needs and situations that we need help with, we weave into that prayer, either in however way we do it, an attitude of thanksgiving for what God has already done. But may prayer be the first place we go instead of the last resort. It might surprise us how our attitude changes. So not only the expression of positivity, Paul is telling us how we can express that, but the encouragement of positivity. And we find our text, our theme verse here in Philippians 4:8, so finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, are honest, or just, or pure, or lovely, or a good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. And those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. The God of peace shall be with you. Watch your words, the writer said, watch your thoughts, the writer said, they become words. Watch your words because they become actions. Watch your actions because they become habits. Watch your habits because they become character. And watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Most of our phones, if you have a smartphone anyways, you can pull up stats on how much you use your phone and what you use it for. How long it's been on. What apps you've used the most. And if we were brutally honest this morning, I wonder how we would answer the question, how do they fit in the parameter of verse 8? Our life as a whole, what we read and where we go, and what we watch, and the hobbies that consume, and the idle time, the idle moments of our life, how do they fit within the parameters of verse 8? Let's take it a step further. How do the things that consume the most important commodity we have, our time, how do they affect our ability to culture a positive attitude? The reality is that what we input into the gray matter between our ears, the thoughts, they become our words. Because that's where our heart is. That's what we brought into our life. Our actions come out of what is in our heart. The actions form the habits of our life, and the habits make us who we are, our character, our integrity, the core of who we are, and it sets us on a tangent on where we're going to spend our eternal destiny, somewhere that started with the thoughts that we allow to go in our great habit. And somewhere in that progression is the emphasis of working on our positive attitude. I personally find it hard to be positive when most of what's going on around me or what I'm thinking about is negative, when it's bad, when it's discouraging, when it's frustrating, when it's down and out and gloom, and if that is what's being digested into our being, it would be hard to be positive. Now, I don't for a minute believe that ignorance is bliss, or sticking our head in the sand is the way to go, and just being like that until Jesus comes and whatever happens, happens. However, if we're filling our minds with the news, if we're constantly listening to Fox News or Glenn Beck or Facebook or YouTube or you fill in the blank, if we're filling our lives with the embodiment of bad news and war and fighting and killing and heinous atrocities that are happening in our life, bad economy, terrible politics, it's about enough to make the most docile person discouraged. And I know because a while back I was trying to keep up with current events, all the world events, the U.S. news, world news, this war and that thing, and it got to the point there was kind of just a dark cloud that kind of just rested in it, digesting all of this negativity. And finally I come to the point, I said, you know what? Enough is enough. Listen, I'm not listening to that. I can't continually take in all this negativity. The negativity is not doing me any good. This negativity cannot be filling the idle moments of my life. There are things that will encourage positivity. Just to humor me, I went to Google and I Googled things that will make you smile. And there's websites that list hundreds of things that'll make you smile, that'll make you laugh, that'll bring some sort of encouraging positivity. But here in verse 8, there's a pretty good litmus test, pretty clear, of things that will point us in the right direction. Good things. That'll lead us to a point of having a more positive attitude. The things, true, honest, things that are just, things that are pure, things that are lovely, things that are good report, things that are virtuous, things that are praiseworthy. Paul says, think on these things. Ingest these things regularly. Fill the gray matter between your ears with these things. Don't neglect trying to search out these things. And if it doesn't pass this litmus test, I think we can be justified in asking ourselves, does this need to be in my life? Does this thing that may be negative or discouraging, does it need to be in my life? Can I remove it? What things are a detriment to cultivating a positive attitude? If they're a detriment to having a positive attitude, just remove them. Remember, it's pointing you towards a destiny. The thought, it becomes your destiny. Verse 9, Paul encourages them. He said, I've tried to be an example. I've tried to be an example of cultivating these important things in your life. I've tried to do them so that you can see what you've been taught, what you've learned, what you've seen in me. Paul says, do those things. And the God of peace will be with you. And now twice, we see this, in this passage, we see the byproduct of following through with what Paul was teaching. Peace. Not only rejoicing, but peace. In verse 7, it says, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. And then here in verse 9, at the end of this verse, it says, and God of peace shall be with you. And in a world that is desperately searching for peace, part of how to have it is outlined right here. The encouragement. Do these things, Paul says. Incorporate them into your life. They'll point you in a point of having and culturing a positive attitude in our lives. And Paul we're going to allude to it, do these things, and the third part of the lesson talks about the example of positivity. Paul says that I've tried to teach you these things, and so incorporate them, do them in your life. Verse 10 says, but I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last hair of me hath flourished again, wherein ye were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. Not that I will speak in respect of want, for I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, I know how to abound everywhere, and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need, to do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. A little word, but, in verse 10, signals a change of thought. Paul transitions from teaching, instructing what needs to be done to have a personal testimony of an example. And Paul transitions into saying, this is my life. This is who I am. This is my testimony. Remember, Paul is in prison and not facing the best of circumstances, He would have a few reasons to be down and out. But he goes back to verse 4, brings up this second time, rejoice in the Lord. And I said, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. Paul's joy was rather properly rooted in Christ. It wasn't merely skipping by. No, it was great. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. He was thankful not only to God, but to those who sacrificially gave to him, had helped him, had blessed his life. And I think it does something for us. It does something for us when we receive thanks from somebody else. It makes us want to do it again. If somebody doesn't say thank you or doesn't show the slightest little bit of appreciation, like, wow, wasn't really made that big of a difference on me. But when somebody says thank you so much, that was whatever it was that you did, it kind of makes you want to go back and just do it again. There's a psychological effect there which we won't have time to go into, but we want to do it again. We just came through the Christmas auction at Penn View, and it requires piles of volunteer hours of staff and students and outside help to make it happen. And during the week of auction, by devoting most of my time there, I came back into the office the Tuesday after auction and had a pile of catching up to do. And I didn't really, if I had to be brutally honest with you, I didn't really feel like sitting down and writing thank you notes. Well, I didn't write them, I printed them up, but they were individual. Didn't really feel like taking that time to say thank you. But in spite of that, I spent several hours over numbers of hours over the next day or two preparing over 120 thank you notes to be mailed out to outside help and people that donated items, and handed out candy with little notes and to different volunteers that were in-house. Why did I do that? Because I recognized that I could not make Christmas auction happen on my own. Couldn't do it without those people. Fraction of it wouldn't even happen. But a step farther is the fact that when people have given, I wanted to positively reinforce the sacrificial giving that was given by people. And I hope that they'll likely be willing to do it again. It's not only about installing a positive attitude in ourselves, but installing a positive attitude in others as well, instilling that. I identify with Paul when he in essence says, I'm not going to tell you all of this to make you feel sorry for me. It's not why I told you that, but rather to explain to you what I've learned. Paul says I've learned. And this attitude of contentment might be one of the hardest lessons in life that we learn. But it's right where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Right where we live. We can stand and talk here about some pious notion of some realm that's unreachable by mortal man, but Paul says, I have put these things into practice. I've not set the bar so high that it's unattainable, but I have learned these things. I've put them into practice. I've applied these principles that I've tried to teach to you in my life. I've learned to live in a state of contentment. I have a message that I preached a long time ago that was entitled Wrapping Up Thanksgiving and Giving Thanks for Christmas. And part of that idea is that the transition that goes from thanking God at Thanksgiving for all the things that we've been blessed with to making a list of all the things that we want or need or would like to have at Christmas. There's a disconnect somewhere in there in that short period of time in these two veins of thought where we're thankful and we are wanting more. Discontentment does not lend itself to positive thinking. Paul mentions things that he was thankful for. He acknowledged that there was times of great need. But no matter what the conditions were, he was going to cultivate an attitude of contentment and positiveness in his life. And the thought here comes full circle from the beginning thoughts that Paul outlines here, and it's all because of Christ. It's because of Him that we're able to do what we do. We're able to accomplish because it's Christ that's working in us. And the blessings and the ability and the strength and the will to do, it comes from God above. Both the hummingbird and the vulture fly over the same landscape. But all the vulture sees is rotting meat, because that's what they're looking for. They thrive off of dead animals. Instead, they search out the colorful, beautiful blossoms of the flowering plants that are all around. Vultures live on what was, they live on the past. They fill themselves with what is dead and gone. But hummingbirds live on what is. They seek new life. They fill themselves with the freshness and the vibrancy of life that is. The reality is that each bird finds what it's looking for. We all do. We find in life exactly what we're looking for. I think if we're looking for the negative things in life, we'll be sure to find them. And we'll be the negative Nelly we talked about before. And we focus on the positive things. We focus on the things that are good and are wholesome. And need I get back to verse 8 of chapter 4 of Philippians? Focus on these things. Yes or no? Only you can answer that this morning. If no, I pray that God would help us to seek out the good things. I pray that God would help us in this area of life. And maybe identify some areas that we can